Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 2, the American West, Lesson 31. So today, the question that we are trying to answer, our pizza bite question, is what is the life lesson in the John Henry text? So what is the lesson that we can keep in our hearts, in our minds from these versions of John Henry's story? How can we use this life lesson in our daily lives? So we are going to be exploring John Henry's actions during one of the important events in his story that we see in both versions. But before we do that, I want us to look at our timeline. As we are wrapping up our exploration through texts about the early American West, I want us to think about our timeline that we have. So we started our timeline with the text in the black colors. That was from when we learned about the buffalo are back. We learned that Indians and buffalo lived together long ago. In the 1800s, settlers started to move into the West and they tried to take over Native American lands. So trying to meet together, there were promises that were made by settlers that were broken, which led to wars. The Native Americans were eventually pushed out of their land, and so settlers tried to farm on that land, and so the land dried up, so nothing grew, and the bison were nearly dying out. Moving into the 1900s, President Roosevelt and other members of the U.S. government tried to make amends with the land. They tried to bring the American West back to its healthy state. They tried to bring back the prairie grass, the bison, the animals that live there. And today, the buffalo are back in the prairie. Then we read the informational text about Plains Indians. We learned that people came to the Great Plains in the 1700s and 1800s, and that with the settlers moving into the West, traveling through the Oregon Trail, Plains Indians were forced into reservations. When they were forced out of their homeland, they were forced into places where they had to live together. When we read The Legend of the Blue Bonnet, we learned that story was about the Comanche tribe. And we learned about the legend of the Blue Bonnet and how the Comanche people had learned from She Who Is Alone to make sacrifices to save their land. That was a legend. That was a story from long ago. But we know historically in history that the Comanche people were pushed out of Texas and were forced to live in reservations in Oklahoma. So that was the last that we explored the reservations of the Native Americans. Then we started talking about Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman, and John Henry. We learned that John Chapman was born in 1774. He did a lot of great things as he traveled west, planting apple trees and building relationships with settlers and Native Americans. And we know that John Chapman died in 1845. Now, the last two events that we have on here is about John Henry. We know that John Henry was born between 1840 to 1850. We don't have an exact date for when he was born. During John Henry's life, he did a lot of brave and amazing things while working in the American West, while traveling through the American West on the railroads. And we believe that he helped with creating the Big Bend Tunnel, which was built from 1870 to 1873. So that is a lot that we have on this timeline. What do you think is the most important event that we see on this timeline? What do you think is the most important event? Tell me in the puzzle, what do you think is the most important? So something that I believe is the most important is understanding the positive and negative ways that the settlers and Native Americans impacted each other. So, understanding that the Native Americans were native to the early American West first is important to know. It's also important to know the perspective of these settlers and how they traveled west. And we learned that there were positive events, there were negative events that we see on both sides. And so when we are thinking about our time with studying the early American West, Smarties, it's so important to think about what is the main lesson that we can learn from all of this information, all of these stories. How is this building our knowledge? So we are going to be trying to figure out the life lesson of John Henry's story. So we're going to be exploring the life lesson through John Henry's contest with the steam drill. Now we know this happened in both versions of the story. So we are going to use movement and sound effects to help us retell this important event to find that life lesson. So here's what you're going to do, and I'm going to do it too. We are going to reread these two versions, the event where he is racing against the steam drill, and we're going to, through our acting, we're going to try to figure out what can we learn from John Henry's experience. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay, we're going to move a little bit. Okay? We're moving because I want you all to be able to see me moving too. Okay, so you're going to need to stand up for this, okay? Are you ready? So we are going to act out this event. So I'm going to read it, and as I'm reading it, I want you to act out what's happening. So use movement, use sound effects. Be fun, be creative with it. All right. So we learn on the last page that he was going to battle the steam drill. So the machine shrieked as it started. Shriek! John Henry swung the hammer, and a crash of steel on steel split the air. Clang, bang, clang. The drill got red hot in Little Bill's hands. He quickly dropped it and picked up another. Hiss, whistle, rattle. Men frantically heaved coal into the hungry, roaring engine and poured water into the steaming boiler. Whoop, clang, whoop, bang! John Henry's hammer whistled as he swung it. Chug, chug, clatter, rattled the machine. Hour after hour raced by. The machine was ahead. Hand me that 20-pound hammer, Lil Bill. Harder and faster crashed the hammer. Great chunks of rock fell as John Henry ripped hole after hole into the tunnel wall. The machine rattled and whistled and drilled even faster. Friends doused John Henry and Lil Bill with cold water to keep them going. Then John Henry took a deep breath, picked up 2 sledgehammers, and sang, "Ain't no hammer strike such fire, strike like lightning, Lord, and I won't tire. Hammers like this, Lord, there's never been. I'll keep us swinging them, Lord, until we win." So swing those hammers. John Henry swung both mighty hammers faster and faster. He moved so fast the men could see only a blur and sparks from his striking hammers. His strikes rang out like great heartbeats. So let's do that. Boom, 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 boom. At the other side of the tunnel, the machine shrieked, groaned, and rattled and drilled. Then all at once, it shook and shuddered, wheezed, and stopped. Frantically, men worked to get it going again, but they couldn't. It had collapsed. John Henry's hammering still rang and echoed through the tunnel with a strong and steady beat. Suddenly, there was a great crash. Boom! Light streamed into the dark tunnel. John Henry had broken through. Wild cries of joy burst from the men. Still holding one of his hammers, John Henry stepped out into the glowing light of a dying day. It was the last step he ever took. Even the great heart of John Henry could not bear the strain of his last task. John Henry died with his hammer in his hand. If you listen to the locomotives roaring through the tunnels and across the land, you'll hear them singing of the great steel-driving man, John Henry. Listen. All right, so in Keats' version, the first version that we read, what do we learn about John Henry and his character? What kind of worker is he? What does he do what does he not do? And what does he do when he races the steam drill? Tell me what you noticed in the puzzle. What do we see that we can keep in our hearts and mind about John Henry? So something that I saw is that he never gave up. He kept going and he kept swinging harder and harder. He wanted to win, so he never gave up. And did he win in this version? Yes, he was brave. He was a hard worker. He kept going. Sounds like John Henry has a growth mindset. All right, let's act out the second version now. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Get ready. Here we go. John Henry went on his way. He had heard that any man good with a hammer could find work building the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad through West Virginia. That was where he had been going when he stopped to build the road. The next day, John Henry arrived at the railroad. However, work had stopped. The railroad tracks had to go through a mountain, and such a mountain. Next to it, even John Henry felt small. But a worker told John Henry about a new machine they were going to use to tunnel through the mountain. It was called a steam drill. It can hammer faster and harder than 10 men, and it never has to stop and rest. The next day, the boss arrived with the steam drill. John Henry said to him, "Let's have a contest." Say that with me. Are you ready? Let's have a contest. Your steam drill against me and my hammers. The man laughed. Laugh with me. I've heard you're the best there ever was, John Henry, but even you can't out-hammer a machine. Let's find out, John Henry answered. Boss shrugged. Don't make me know, never mind. You start on the other side of the mountain. I'll start the steam drill over here. Whoever goes to the middle first is the winner. The next morning, all was still. The birds weren't singing and the roosters weren't crowing. When the son didn't hear the rooster, he wondered if something was wrong. So he rose a couple of minutes early to see. What he saw was a mountain as big as hurt feelings. On one side was a big machine hooked up to hose. It was belching smoke and steam. As the machine attacked the mountain, rocks and dirt and underbrush flew into the air. On the other side was John Henry. Next to the mountain, he didn't look much bigger than a wish that wasn't going to come true. He had a 20-pound hammer in each hand and muscles hard as wisdom in each arm. As he swung them through the air, they shone like silver. And when the hammers hit the rock, they rang like gold. Before long, tongues of fire leaped out with each blow. So, John Henry. On the other side, the boss of the steam drill felt the mountain shudder. So shudder. He got scared and hollered, "I believe this mountain is caving in." From the darkness inside the mountain came a deep voice. "It's just my hammer sucking wind, just my hammer sucking wind." There wasn't enough room inside the tunnel for the rainbow, so it wrapped itself around the mountain on the side where John Henry was. All through the night, John Henry and the steam drill went at it. In the light from the tongues of fire shooting out of the tunnel from John Henry's hammer blows, folks could see the rainbow wrapped around the mountain like a shawl. So we are swinging those hammers, smarties. So swing those hammers like John Henry. The sun came up extra early the next morning to see who was winning. Just as it did, John Henry broke through and met the steam drill. The boss of the steam drill was flabbergasted. John Henry had come 1.25 miles. The steam drill had only come 1/4. Folks were cheering and yelling, John Henry, John Henry. Do that with me. Are you ready? John Henry, John Henry. John Henry walked out of the tunnel into the sunlight, raised his arms over his head, a hammer in each hand. The rainbow slid off the mountain and around his shoulder. With a smile, John Henry's eyes closed, and slowly he fell to the ground. John Henry was dead. He had hammered so hard and so fast and so long that his big heart had burst. Everybody was silent for a minute. Then came the sound of soft crying. Some said it came from the moon. Another one said she saw the sun shed a tear. All right. So, let's think about both versions of these stories. They both told the same event, and they were very similar. What does John Henry do in both versions of the story? He starts the contest, but what happens at the end of the contest? Tell me in the puzzle. He wins, right? He wins the contest by hammering so long, so hard, and so quickly. What does John Henry prove is possible by winning? Think about it. He was a person, he was a man that went against a machine. What was he able to prove by doing that? Think about it. If I have to prove myself, that means I have to do something really hard, and I have to do it with all my strength. So what does John Henry prove is possible by winning? Tell me what you think in the puzzle. What did he prove by winning against the steam drill? Tell me in the puzzle. He proved that hard things are possible, but you have to try. He proved that he could win against a machine. It took bravery, it took courage to try something hard, to try something new. So, what is it about John Henry that helps him do this? What about his character made him do this? Was he scared? Was he always tired? Was he shy? What about his character helped him do this contest? Tell me in the puzzle. So we know that John Henry was brave and he was willing to persevere, right? Persevere means to keep going. He never gave up. So I want you to think, what is something that you can keep in your heart and your mind from John Henry's experience with the contest against the steam drill? What is a lesson that you learned from John Henry? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that I learned from John Henry is that it takes bravery and courage to try new and hard things. We also learned that winners never quit. They always persevere, and they have a growth mindset. So we can honestly look at John Henry and think about his growth mindset. He was a good learner. He did hard things and was brave when he did them. So tomorrow we are going to be writing about the differences that we saw in the versions of John Henry. Now, we used our organizer to do this yesterday, okay? So tomorrow we are going to use our organizer that we created to answer this question. What are the differences and similarities in the two stories of John Henry? So remember, we are comparing and contrasting Keats' version and Lester's version. So be ready to do some writing very soon. And Smarties, let us finish this lesson with a deep dive. So here's what we're going to do for our deep dive. We are going to do a vocabulary assessment. So what a vocabulary assessment is, I am wanting to see if you know the meanings of these words. So do we know what the word roam means? Do we know wobble, nomadic, distant, untamed, tragedy, and murmur. So I'm going to read a question, and I want you to think about those vocabulary words in the question. I want you in the Ed puzzle to tell me yes if the sentence makes sense or no if it does not. Okay? So, for example, can animals roam in an open field? Can animals roam in an open field? Think about what the word roam means. Roam means to move around slowly. So can animals roam in an open field? Yes. Okay, so if you think yes, they can roam in an open field, you would put yes. If they cannot, you will put no. Okay, so here's our next one. Would someone wobble if they tried to balance on one foot? Would someone wobble if they tried to balance on foot? Yes or no? Tell me in the Ed puzzle. Would someone wobble if they tried to balance on one foot? Okay, our next one. Would a nomadic group of people live in one place forever? Would a nomadic group of people live in one place forever? Yes or no? Tell me in the puzzle. All right, our next one. If you hear a distant sound, is it far away? If you hear a sound in the distance, if you hear a distant sound, is that sound far away? Yes or no? Our next one. Would it be safe to go in an untamed animal's cage? Would it be safe to go in an untamed animal's cage? Yes or no? Tell me in the puzzle. Is it a tragedy to spill your milk? Is it a tragedy to spill your milk? Yes or no? Tell me in the puzzle. And our last one, would you murmur in a library? Would you murmur in a library? Yes or no? Tell me in the puzzle. All right, Smarties, that is it for lesson 31. Remember to be like John Henry. Keep that growth mindset. Be brave and courageous with doing new and hard things. I will see you very soon with another lesson about John Henry. Happy learning, Smarties.